Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to Word of Faith Response. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. We have another wonderful program for you because it's telling you about everything that Jesus has done in our lives. You
Yes.
have been hearing about the truth about the Word of Faith Fellowship now for several months. And more importantly, you've been hearing about Jesus and all of the wonderful things that Jesus has done in our lives. And today, I have some very, very good friends of mine, Mark and Suzanne. Mark actually came here in 1994 from New York and Connecticut, that area up there. And Mark is an associate minister in our church. He preaches in our church. When he preaches with everything in him. I think he preaches from the very toes all the way up. He gives his whole heart. He's also a realtor and just a wonderful friend of mine. And Suzanne came here in 1993 from California. Suzanne and I actually grew up together. So, as you may remember, when I shared about myself, I came here from Los Angeles in many years ago, 1990. And Suzanne came 3 years after us. We grew up together, actually. Her parents and my parents were friends. They'd bring us over to each other's houses and we'd go off and play. My sister is her age and they were very good. I tag along as the little brother. They let me tag along. That was nice of them. And so we had a great time. And actually, Suzanne came here not much longer after I did. So you're going to hear just some wonderful things from both of them. And I want to jump right in. So I'm going to let Mark take over.
Thank you so much, Mark. We're so grateful to be here. Suzanne and I are just grateful, Jim, for this opportunity to give our testimony of what Jesus has done in our lives. Really been looking forward to doing this too. So, like Mark said, I grew up in New York State, way upstate, in a little town smaller than Rutherfordton, and grew up 60s and the 70s, and we had a pretty dysfunctional family. A lot of things happened that shouldn't have happened, but they did. Actually, when I was young, my mom left us because it was so bad at the house, and that was a season that was very difficult. And so all that, we grew up never even knowing about being born again. That never was even mentioned. I never heard of that until my brother went away to college and he came home and he started talking about being born again. And it's the first I ever heard of it. And he had me pray a prayer. But at that point in my life, there wasn't a surrender. It was just a prayer I prayed, but nothing really happened in my heart. And that was going into my high school years, and all the things of the world were being offered: the drugs, the alcohol, the parties, and that's what I really began to do. So right when Jesus was there coming to get my life set on course right, that's when the devil was right there offering the world, and I went with the world, and things just got from bad to worse, and to the point where with our home, I vowed I never get married. And that was a pretty strong vow I made in my heart. And it really affected me. And I really began to run from God. And like I said, it got from bad to worse, to the point when after high school, I went to a rock concert with my friends. And it was the opening band was a band called AC/DC. And the song that was being sung was I'm on a Highway to Hell. And I'm packed in a rock concert with thousands of young people, and we're packed in, and the air is so thick from the smoke of drugs, and plus I've been drinking, and that's about as high as you can get when you do both. And I'll never forget it in that song, and everyone's singing it with all their heart. And I heard so clear God say to me, "Why? What are you doing here?" I heard that right in the middle of that dark place. As dark as that place was, I heard God say to me, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What am I doing here?" And immediately I was sober. And I turned around and pressed through that crowd with everything in me. And I just got out of there. You had to go to this underground place to get to the parking lot. I sat on my car till everybody got out. And everybody came out afterwards, after the concert was all done, and said, "What happened to you?" I said, "I want to go home." And I remember that so clearly, because it's like something switched in my heart, and I thought, I've lost God and I want to find him again. And I just began to press in with everything in me, not knowing anything. And that was a very important key in my life. And it was just, to this day, it's a miracle that I could hear God and hear that voice so clearly. And so, in my desire to get my heart right with God, I was out of high school. My parents had moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and for a business move, and I just want to get my heart right with God, and the only thing I knew to do at that point was I needed to make things right with my parents. And so I moved to Tennessee, took my college from the community college credits with me, and I finished up my college at UT Knoxville, and I went for graphic design. And when you do graphic design, you get done with college with something called a portfolio of all of the work you've done. And with that, I went to New York City to look for a job, and I got a job in advertising, and I got it. I got everything I wanted. Always wanted to live in New York. I wanted to do that graphic design. I wanted to travel, and there I am in New York, and I had lost that desire seeking God, but God was still there the whole time. It's really amazing. His drawing power kept coming and inviting me and inviting me, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I can't describe the emptiness in my heart when you get everything you want, but you don't have Jesus. And I got to the point where all I wanted to do was die. It was so tangible. I was getting ready to turn 25, and the desire just to die was so strong. And I could explain to you why. But it's because I was running from God. I was running from the call of God on my life that I didn't realize I had. And so I began to cry out to God, and I would just constantly just walk the streets after work. And, what is the purpose for my life? Why am I here? And I at one point I called the 700 Club, and they gave me the name of a little church, and I went there. And on Wednesday nights, they met on the Empire State Building, and they had a church service there because in New York City, real estate is you can't find any places to meet, and most of the churches are pretty dead. They're pretty, you get some pretty strange things out there, but this was just a little church of believers, and I was so grateful to be there. And actually, Kim, who shared last Friday, she went there at that time with her husband at that time was Mark Misha, and I got prayer. I said, I need prayer. And they prayed for me for 45 minutes. And I'll never forget it. It's just like for 45 minutes, they just prayed with all their heart. And I prayed with all my heart. And something left me in that 68th floor of the Empire State Building with the desks all pushed back in that office. And from that point on, all I wanted to do was to serve God. I remember going back to my little apartment and just weeping on the floor and saying, Jesus, I'm so sorry. And that floor had little parquet wood floors. And then all the little cracks I could see just fill with my tears and just repenting to God for running from all my life. And so from that point on, I was the first one there and the last one to leave. They finally just gave me the keys, and I was the one that always brought the equipment to church. And I just wanted to do anything I could. My career took second place, and just knowing Jesus took first place. And that ministry moved up to Connecticut. And so eventually I moved to Connecticut also, and I went to the Bible school. I preached in the Bible school. I taught in the Bible school, and I just gave my life to it. And it was a non-denominational church, but the pastors would not let Jesus deal with their hearts. And the pastor himself got into a lot of sin, and they ended up getting divorced. And that was probably one of the hardest things to go through after giving my heart and my life to that. And for that to happen, I can't explain how devastating that was, not just for me, but for everybody when that was all happening. And I remember at that point being in my little apartment up in Connecticut and saying, if this is the ministry, I don't want anything to do with it. And then the next thing that came out of my mouth was, but it's not my life. I've given it to you. And the next thing God spoke to me, that same voice that spoke to me in that rock concert said to me, Jeremiah 3:15. And I wrote that down. It says that, and I will give you spiritual shepherds after my own heart in the final time, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding and judgment. And I knew God was going to take care of me. I knew God said that to me. That was the same voice that brought me out of the world back in that rock concert. And so I remember back in, when I was still living in New York and going to church there and helping out there, I got to go on a ministry trip to the Soviet Union, when it's still the Soviet Union, with Sam Whaley and a team. And it changed my life forever. And so when I made that decision, I'm not running from God. I'm going to do the will of God. God began to speak to me about coming here to Spindale, North Carolina. And this was where God had called me to be. And it's just so many, I really nutshell a lot of things, but it really was the best thing I ever did in my life. I knew that God told me. I'd come down for seminars before and absolutely loved it here. I loved how everybody gave their whole heart. I mean, if you're just in our praise and worship, your heart just melts. It just like changes right in the middle of our praise and worship. The teachings were definitely teachings of learning to walk with God and hear God's voice and obey Him. And I knew that's what I wanted. And so I moved here, and my life really began to change. And it was nothing but good. Good things started happening. You know, our Pastor Jane Whaley, she said, we're going to have a class. It's going to call the Friends of God class. And we all wanted to go to this class. And we all wanted to learn how to be friends, you know. And a lot of us came with all kinds of stuff, like me with my vow I never get married. So it's hard to hear who's going to be your wife. If you've made a vow with the devil, you're never going to get married. So, and their class was all based on the scripture in John 15:15, I believe it says that Jesus said to his disciples, I no longer call you my servants, but my friends. And I tell you, because I tell you everything that the Father tells me. And that was the foundation to that class. And that was the foundation of learning to walk together. And we were so grateful. We just wanted to learn how to hear God and say to each other what God told us to say to each other. And that was one of those pearls that I needed to break the power of what vow I made when I was a little boy in that house growing up. And so God did give me a pastor after his own heart that taught me knowledge and understanding. And I began to receive in my heart. And then there was one day I just started crying out to God, God, all I want is your will for my life. I just want your will for my life. And here I'm crying out for the will of God, you know, what my job or whatever it might be. And God said to me, and I known Suzanne, I got to fellowship with her, with different people, and I just loved her. She was a great friend. And I heard God say, Suzanne is the one that I've called for you to walk with. She's the one that I've given to you. And I still hear it to this day. That same voice that told me in that rock concert, what are you doing here? That same voice that told me I'm going to give you shepherds after my own heart is the same voice that came to me and said, Suzanne's the one that I have for you. And so we heard from God that we were to be married. And it was so precious. We're going to sing a song after Suzanne shares. But in that song, you know, it's amazing. I didn't tell a lot of details of what I went through to get here. And God spoke to Jane and gave her a prophetic song about our lives, not just about the past that I walked through, but what God had for us and the love that God would give to us for each other. So we know, you know, you can't take this away from us. Right. No man could get us to marry anybody. I mean, when you make a vow like that, you know, the lie is that we're told who to marry. You couldn't do it with me. The truth is I got a pastor after his own heart named Jane Whaley. And she taught me God's ways and how to submit to God, to hear God's voice. And I was able to receive his will and able to hear his voice in the midst of that darkness in me and receive my wife. And it's been nothing but good. And so I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I want to give Suzanne an opportunity to share too.
Okay, well, I grew up in Southern California, like Mark said. Our families grew up really close. I grew up in a Christian home, but I mean, really, my parents, neither one grew up in church-going homes. So it was kind of a new thing. When I was small, they decided we're going to start going to church. And I actually have two older siblings. I was the youngest. And so when I was little, we started going to church, and my mom really had a hunger for God. It's like it never was enough. Like we would, Sundays wasn't enough for her. So she just started seeking out, different churches or different ministries that we could be a part of. And in that's where she met Mark's mom. And that's where that relationship started. So that was the early 70s. So really, there was always a place where I was being taught about Jesus. And at the same time, our family was pretty dysfunctional, like Mark said. I mean, really, my parents were not together a lot of the time. It was kind of an in and out situation. My brother and sister were older, so there was a lot of problems with drugs and alcohol. And so really, our family was pretty troubled for several years. And I do remember at one point when I was about 9 years old, and it was a really, really sad time in my life. And it was, my dad was gone because of what he was in the middle of. My brother had moved out. My sister, who was she ended up moving out at an early age. So it was just my mom and I. And I'll never forget, those days my mom was pretty much in bed every day because she was really struggling. And it was like an all-time low for me. And I'll never forget getting out of school one day and walking across a basketball court, and the thought hit me, why am I alive? Why do I even exist? And I mean, that's not a thought most 9-year-olds should have. But I remember that it just was like an overwhelming hopelessness came to me. And God said, as clear as we're talking today, you're alive because I want you alive. And you exist because I want you to exist. And God spoke it to me. And it was like instant hope. I could grab hold of that. No one talked to me. There was no Sunday school teacher that talked to me. That was my hope. I mean, God spoke that to me, and God anchored me. And I mean, time went on. My dad came back. My brother and my sister pretty much were out at that point, and I kind of grew up more like an only child. But our lives as a family, and my life personally, was a bit of a roller coaster. My mom, we'd go to meetings, and that would anchor her, that would anchor me, and the drawing power of God was always there. And then it's like, then you'd have the pull of the world. Then I'd go to another meeting or something, and it was just like a back and forth. But I do know, like, by the time I was in high school, there was a lot of things I was involved with that were really wrong. So, one of the things that was going on too, in my life, ever as far back as I can remember, I always would paint and draw. Since I was tiny, I did artwork. And so, it was kind of like a set thing. You're going to go to art school. It was never something I asked God to do. It was just, that's what you're going to do. You've always painted. You're going to go do art. And so by the time I was getting ready to graduate from high school, that's what I was looking at art schools. We were looking on the East Coast because I didn't want to stay in LA. And at the same time, my lifestyle was really getting worse. And when I graduated from high school, I went to Europe all summer, and I did just about everything you can imagine. And I went to most every country in Europe, and I got involved in a lot of sin. And at the time, I was accepted to all the main art schools, New York, Philadelphia. I mean, just every place. And I was choosing, where am I going to go? My life was not being set on course in the right way. And I went to a summer camp that summer, and I didn't go with any of my friends. I just went to a summer camp in Los Angeles, and it was actually the church that Mark and I had grown up together in. And usually it was just kind of, you saw your friends, you went to some services, but there never was much of any kind of pressure put on your heart. But this particular summer camp, there was a speaker there, and I don't know what happened, but all I know is God really brought me to my knees. And I remember one night giving my heart to Jesus and saying, I don't want to live on this roller coaster anymore. I want to give my heart to you, Jesus. I don't want to go down the path that I've been going on. And I knew, I saw it in front of me, what my brother and my sister had gone through. And I could see where those were some of the setups for me. And so it was a decision. I put my stake in the ground. I will never go back to that. I will never go further with that. And probably within a week or two, I went away to art school. And anyone who's ever gone to art school, I mean, like a real, accredited art school, they are rampant with sin. I mean, it's every kind of weirdness you can imagine is what is the norm in an art school. And I was totally a fish out of water. I had no business being there. But all I know is God got to my heart, and I couldn't go with it. At every point, I couldn't go with this, I couldn't go with this. And it was a real proving of my heart. And so when others would go out for drugs or go out to, I mean, everything that you do, I would go back to my dorm and I'd read my Bible. And I know those were places where God was really getting to my heart. So from there, I went on to Italy and I did more travel, but God was still dealing with my heart and still dealing with my heart. And I got so, I mean, yes, I painted and everything all the time, but I got so I hated the art world. I mean, I really did. And so I eventually pulled out and I thought, this is not for me. I don't want to go this course anymore. And so it was always like everywhere I would go, I was always kind of like roaming streets, it seemed like. What am I supposed to be doing? I know I want God, but I hate this art world. This is how I felt. So every place I'd go, whether it was Italy, whether it was even in Washington, D.C., it was always like I'm searching for something. So when I got out of art school, that's when I went to South Africa. And it was still searching, anything. I went for it with a missionary organization and just trying to find something. And there again, God was always dealing with my heart. And, I was there for a while and I went up to a country called Namibia and I was way out in the bush. And we were there just, to help with some local tribes. And I mean, truthfully, I'm not even quite sure why I was there, but we were out in the middle of the wilderness and everyone was just going to pray. That's all we knew to do was we were going to pray. And I start praying in English and I start weeping and it got stronger and it got stronger. And before I know it, some very strong and loud prayer were coming out of me. And the whole time I'm weeping and I'm groaning. And I mean, it's like my whole being, I'm giving to God. And I'm thinking, I've never heard this kind of prayer in my life. And all I could do was feel the heart of God. And I could feel the presence of God. And it just kept going and it kept going. And I mean, I think I was out. We were out in the bush. I think it went on for about an hour and a half. And it got stronger and it got stronger. And like I said, my mind was like, I've not ever heard this before. But it did come to me about how it said the Israelites would groan to God, and where David would groan and travail to God. And so different scriptures were starting to come to me. And when I got back into, it was civilization, because I really was out in the wilderness. It was about a week later, and I thought, I've got to tell my mom, because I knew my mom was someone I could confide in with this. And I got back and I said, Mom, you're not going to believe what happened to me out in the wilderness when I was out in Africa. And I told her how I prayed. And she said, Suzanne, I've just been to a place in North Carolina where everyone prays like that all the time. She said, we weep and we groan and we travail. And,
Yes.
and I said, that's how I prayed for an hour and a half. That's how I prayed. And it was no longer just this thing that I did. It was like, yes, the scripture started coming alive. And so that's when I visited back here. And Mark was living here at the time. Mark Morris was living here at the time. And my life totally changed. And I said, when I came here, I said, I'm moving there. I know this is the place I'm supposed to be. God spoke to me. This is what I've been searching for. This is what I've been roaming around and searching and trying to find all my life. This is where God planted me. This is the place. And so I ended up moving. Let's see, that was probably within a year or so, I moved here. And then within a year, that's when Mark Doyle, my husband, that's when he moved here. And then, like he said, it was just walking out of friendship. And then we got married. So, God speaks to us. It's like God spoke to him in a rock concert. God spoke to me in that basketball court at 9 years old. It's like the same voice speaks to us today. And I'm so grateful I'm so grateful I heard the voice of God to move here and come here and to marry Mark. It's been such a blessing.
So again, we're going to sing our song to you. Again, this is a prophetic song that God gave the words to Jane Whaley, our pastor, and it's holds true. It'll stand. The words in this song stand true for the 18 years we've been married, and they'll stand true throughout eternity. The love of God is the most powerful thing there is. For so many years I was seeking, searching, trying to find the purpose for my life. I was in the world only to find hopelessness and torment coming to my heart and mind. Then one day I had a change of heart, which turned me from the world to seeking God. Hopelessness and torment began to dissolve. Hope and peace of mind I began to find, as God through Jesus his Son began to show the richness of his blessings that were to come. This day I've seen a great blessing right before my eyes. You are truly a blessing sent from God to be a part of his fulfillment plan for my life. Who would have ever thought such blessings could be in store? Such love, such beauty, such fellowship, and so much more. God's love for his children no man can understand. Its depth, its height, its greatness in establishing God's plan. I praise God for all the love in my heart that I have for you, as I yield myself this day, being joined as one. I can truly say, Suzanne, with all my heart, I love you. You two are a blessing sent from God to me, for his plan is being fulfilled, daily working in me. I have surrendered my will for his love in my heart to be fulfilled. This love I have for you, I will continue to give to you only. As I say this day, I love you forever and always. Blessings from heaven are coming to us. Our hearts are open wide to receive. You are truly a precious blessing sent from God especially for me. God's fulfillment of his precious love, abounding in our hearts, lasting throughout eternity. Yes, his love will last throughout eternity. Yes, his love will last throughout eternity.
Amen. And you just heard the wonderful story from Mark and Suzanne, and they have truly seen blessings from heaven have come from above. And we thank you again for listening to Word of Faith Responds. We will be back again Wednesday, 8:30 to 9, and we hope you have a wonderful day.